Thanks, Marissa, and thanks everyone for joining today. We're excited to deliver the content that we had developed for our previous meeting. A news flash from me. I welcomed first baby boy to my family, which was the emergency that was noted last time. Everything is going well, and we appreciate your flexibility here. So, similar to the last couple sessions, the structure of this session will be kind of a primer up front, and then we'll get into some demos, some examples, and get some hands-on experience with the tools and methods that we're going to be talking about today. We'll pull up the poll results kind of midway through the presentation as a platform for discussion as we head into some of the examples. So without further ado, I will go ahead and share my screen. And is everyone able to see the screen? Perfect. Okay. So today's topic is strategic planning, leveraging generative AI. A lot of the content that we'll cover in this first part is going to be familiar for folks who have been using generative AI and hopefully inspirational to folks who are kind of just starting to get into this. So really kind of the high level idea here is that generative AI, large language models, tools like ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini can be used to kind of augment your strategic thinking related tasks. It's really kind of a thought partner for you as the subject matter expert in your field to help with things like idea generation, analysis, planning, and even drafting of documents that support strategic planning efforts. So you think of AI as a thought partner, but ultimately, the human is the one that's accountable for the outputs. We'll talk a little bit about that as we get into the next slide, but some ideas for things that you can use generative AI for as part of this process, brainstorming, summarizing information, exploring what if scenarios very quickly, actually providing some frameworks and approaches that you might consider as part of your strategic planning, and then actually the drafting and refining of documents, which these language models are really good at. So that said, all the benefits that come along with using generative AI, it also has its limits that we've touched on in the previous sessions. So accuracy and hallucinations, these models can generate plausible but incorrect information. So it's always a good idea to make sure you're fact checking, asking it to provide sources for the information that it's providing, using it for drafts, not for final documents. I don't know if anyone saw in the news, but a large consulting firm just had to refund some of the fees that it was paid for an effort that it performed, and it used AI as part of it, and it put in a bunch of fake citations that an academic researcher caught as part of that report. So these things are, they're being used regularly, and it's really important to make sure that, you're accountable for the outputs of these. The other thing is the lack of local context. It's kind of linked to the accuracy piece, but it doesn't automatically know what's going on in your region. So the more information that you can provide to these models as part of your efforts and strategic planning, brainstorming, that type of thing, the more relevant and accurate your outputs will be to your specific situation. There's also, these models were trained on the entirety of the internet. So there is a risk of the bias that already existed in that information. There's a lot of different biases that are associated with these models. There's data breach concerns if you upload information that you don't want to be in the public domain. And of course, the kind of over-reliance where you get a little bit complacent because it's doing such a great job at the task. You get to this point where you kind of just blindly trust AI. So, always keep your data safe. Make sure that you have guidelines for folks that you're working with on what they can and cannot put in as additional context to these models, and use AI as a way to inform your efforts, but not make big decisions that, are really, really important and require that human oversight component. Another thing that we've kind of touched on in some of the previous section is the context window of these models. So as with any AI system, it can only process so much data at once. and it can only output so much data at once. So um, it's best to think about how you can break content into chunks. You can start to think about the way that a human would perform a particular task. For instance, if you're going to start a long report, you're probably not just going to create a draft of the report in your first go. You're going to make an outline first. You're going to draft particular sections. You're going to give guidance for each section. So think about it as the way that maybe you would perform the task and use AI as your helper as part of that. So in addition to kind of some of those limitations, one of the big things that's really critical for getting the most out of these tools and models is to have a robust prompt whenever you're using them. We've talked about some of these tools before, the prompt canvas framework, which is a tool that was developed by an academic researcher that went out and looked at everything that was going on in AI research about a year ago and came up with kind of a 4-block framework for how you should think about what to include in your prompts. It's a great starting point. There's a lot more research that's coming out about prompting. We'll learn more about what prompts are best for what models as we continue through this technological transformation. But always consider using something where you're providing the appropriate context for the task that you want performed. There's also new tools emerging, and each of the kind of big tech companies that provides these models have some version of this. I have an example here of OpenAI's GPT-5 prompt optimizer. It's a system that they built specifically for optimizing prompts to use with the GPT-5 model. So you give it your stream of consciousness. Typically, you want to include some of these things that are in the prompt canvas framework as a starting point so that it has something good to work from. And then it will actually take that and convert it into a prompt that is optimized to get the best output from the GPT-5 model. So you're using AI to help you prompt AI appropriately. So we talked about context being critical as part of kind of one of the prior slides, but when you think about the hallucinations and the accuracy of these models, a lot of times you're giving a model or a tool freedom to go out and search the internet for what it thinks might be the right thing to include as part of its output. The more control and the more hand you have in that process in terms of providing the data, the more likely that the output's going to match the data that you provide. So if you have specific data, if you have prior plans or reports or examples of those, if you have particular policies that you want considered as part of this, all of that information can really help get the output to be, instead of 60% of the way there, maybe 70, 80% of the way there. So you'll have to invest some time up front to ensure that you're providing the appropriate context, but in the end, you'll save time because the output will be much closer to what you want. You'll get those tailored insights, those really good first drafts of a strategic plan or a section of a report, and all of that will be customized to the data that you provided for the region that you're in. So don't rely on the AI models. I think we've talked about this in previous sessions where, a model might go out and think it found something that's really relevant to a particular region, and it ends up being something that is old data or something that's not super relevant, or, it was a piece of data that came before a big change that happened, and so it's no longer accurate. So the more data you can provide, the better. Another point when you're using these models, and we talked about that context window limitation, when you go from that process of brainstorming and starting to build out something with AI and you're actually drafting some form of report, it's best to think about it just the same way that you would. So you don't have to go into ChatGPT and ask it to write you a 30-page report straight out of the gate. It's likely that that's going to exceed the context window and you'll end up with something that's, surface level. Maybe it has some pieces that are great, but a lot of it won't be to the level of detail that is required for your particular task. So you can think about this by, asking the model first to create an outline. You can refine the outline within the tool so that you're sure that it's matching up with your idea for what you want out of this. Then you can say, okay, within this outline, here's a section that I want to draft. I want to ensure that it includes this context and, you know, has this tone, this voice, this data incorporated. If it comes back and it's not necessarily exactly what you were hoping for, you can iterate back and forth with the model in real time as kind of your thought partner to either revise the prompt to get the section to be written a little bit differently or ask the model to change that particular piece of text that you drafted from the get-go. And then, if you're creating a short, full report, a couple pages, maybe you can get away with just kind of going for that full first draft out of the gate. Or, once you draft each of these sections, the newer models are pretty good at following instructions for tying those together and smoothing things out as you go. So the key takeaway here is it works best when you break tasks down just like you would do in your daily work. And you can always very quickly iterate, refine, loop back as needed as you're working with these things. Similar to, if you're sending a document for review by someone else, they're going to send you back some revisions. You're going to make those changes. Now you're inserting AI as another helper as part of that particular loop. So in the last few minutes that I have here, I want to take about 5 minutes to demonstrate a demo of what it looks like to actually do this within ChatGPT. I have the less expensive paid version of ChatGPT for this demo, and I'm going to be running this prompt. So this is a template, and you can use AI to generate a range of templates that are specific to your particular information that you're trying to do or the type of strategic plan that you're trying to create or strategic planning that you're trying to do. You can have it leave placeholders. So in this case, we're going to develop a scenario planning brief for a particular region. We're going to give it the option for us to upload context or do its own web searching as part of it. It's going to define a couple of critical uncertainties, create some named scenarios out of that, and give us some early indicators to watch and some moves that we can make regardless of those scenarios. It's going to output that as a written report with tables as appropriate. So this is a very short template. On the right, customize this to Central Virginia as the luckily selected random region of the day. And we're going to be looking at AI adoption and reshoring intensity. So in order to use the ChatGPT prompt optimizer, I will put a link in the chat after I'm done presenting. All you have to do is, take this text and we'll go over to the link that I provided and you just paste it directly in there. You'll hit optimize and it'll work through this. It'll take a minute or two. I've already done this one as an example. So you can see that it very quickly took that stream of consciousness prompt with the context that we provided and turned it into this kind of very structured prompt. So it has the title, it's instructing the model to build a checklist of all the subtasks that it's going to go through so it can keep track of things. It's got all of these tasks that it's supposed to perform very well written out, separated in ways that the model understands, tells it exactly what to do if information is missing, and tells it what the output should look like and gives some suggested structure. I didn't input any of this information. It was all generated. And the cool thing about the prompt optimizer is you can actually review and get some feedback on your initial prompt as to why the change was made. So over time, as you're doing this, you're going to get better at writing prompts that follow the best practices for whatever particular model you're using, because you'll get this feedback as to why a particular change was made. So we hide these changes. Now, all you have to do is take this refined prompt, copy it, come into your ChatGPT, paste it directly in. And then, as always, you have each platform has its own model selection tool. In this case, for strategic planning, I want to use the thinking version of ChatGPT 5, and I actually used extended thinking to have it think a little bit longer about this. So it will go through its process. I've already run this prompt through ChatGPT, so you can see it followed all the instructions that were created by the prompt optimizer. And you can see, okay, here are the two critical uncertainties. Here's our 4 scenarios with the table structured the way that we wanted, and all of the no regrets moves that we asked it to call out as potential options for this particular task. So quick, easy way to optimize your prompts and get output that's more relevant. If I wanted to be more specific, I could have uploaded additional context specifically for this region as part of this to highlight maybe there's some initial data that's available to determine which of the kind of 4 areas that we already think we're falling into. But I'm going to stop there and stop sharing my screen. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Mike, and we'll take a look at the poll results and maybe have a few minutes of discussion here.
Thank you, Jacob, for that overview, and it's good to see everybody. Thank you to those who filled out the poll. I know that we had a number of people who joined after we had closed out the poll, so we don't have results from everybody, but I'm going to go ahead and share them, and you should be seeing them now. So to nobody's surprise, 100% of our participants have a strategic plan. Over half of those who responded did use AI as a tool as part of developing the strategic plan. And the results around how might you use AI are split, that are between adopting new technologies and training and upskilling, and then a few who are not quite sure yet, which aligns very closely with what we have heard from other economic development and business leaders from our work across North Carolina, across the US over the last couple of months, of asking, what impact is AI having? And we're seeing a lot of, we're trying to figure out how to use it, and we don't quite know yet. I do want to ask, and this can either be for folks who participated in the poll or those who joined afterwards, and did use AI as part of their strategic plan development. Would anybody be willing to share briefly, either kind of voiceover or in the chat, how you used it, or what components of the strategic planning process incorporated AI? And if anybody would like to share now, we feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. And we can also open it up for discussion later. So I think to move forward, I'm going to walk through a couple of examples of an example of how I have used AI in some of my work. And then I want to move to an exercise where we are all going to use it. So if you have not, up to this point, had your kind of AI tool of choice open, and you would like to open it up, now would be a good time to log in and get it up and running, so that we can start to work together. So you should see my screen, and we're going to start with some examples and exercises before we move it. We'll start with some examples and a little bit of an overview from some of our past sessions before we move into the working part of the workshop. So I've shared this with y'all in a couple of the sessions earlier, and I think one of my big takeaways is at the bottom. But what I've found is that they tend to be very useful for compiling and summarizing, especially in any sort of new or emerging field or a field where maybe we're not that familiar. So different policy, technical, or economic changes. As Jacob mentioned earlier, just AI itself and its impact on things like reshoring. They're good for getting a background on a topic. And the topic that I've chosen is one that I'm not that familiar with. They're very helpful to find public sources and references. As Jacob was mentioning, if you go into ChatGPT Pro, you can do some deep research tools and get deeper look into sources and references. And again, specific prompting helps. But what our challenges were that sometimes there was reliance on unverified sources. And especially if you're not using a pro or a deep research account, you're going to see um, just some public press releases, non-paywall news sources, or you may not know where the data comes from. So seeing some of those original sources can really help. Sometimes there's very generic output, although we're starting to see that some of that output keeps getting better and better. And sometimes they'll fail to follow prompts. So as Jacob mentioned earlier, that AI hallucination is something we see from time to time. But I want to emphasize what I've been learning at the bottom, which is these tools are changing quickly, and what works today might not be the same in 6 months. I will say that the work that I was doing 6 months ago, looking into some of these questions, um, already feels a little bit outdated. And so being able to um, just being able to keep up with how quickly these things are changing is a challenge on its own. And I will not profess to be an AI expert by any means. And so I think that as I learn through this and through our economic development experience, it's good to see how that's evolving and what it looks like for a day-to-day user. So I asked AI to generate a strategy for rural economic development. Our prompt was to research 4 to 5 regions similar to West Virginia that have successful entrepreneurial ecosystems, focusing on rural and Appalachian communities, analyzing governance structures, operational models, funding, and sustainability. Create a roadmap with actionable steps, milestones, and KPIs, and then deliver a concise report with an executive summary with an operational model and strategy for supporting West Virginia's entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the executive summary came together, and without a lot of additional prompting beyond what was here, we found that we look at a lot of comparative programs from similar states: Kentucky, Ohio, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama. They provide a recommendation of an operational model, which is a public-private partnership with a nonprofit hub at the anchor, gives a diversified funding strategy. It provides a strategic roadmap and then provides a stakeholder engagement strategy in a fairly extensive, fairly strong report. So what we found was that it gave us a really concise, useful summary of all the options that are available. So we get that 5 bullet point executive summary and that high level understanding. But diving into it in particular, using the deep research model here, we were able to see the sources. And most of the report was really just pulled and copied from a 2018 ARC report on entrepreneurship in Appalachia. And so going through it, on the left, we have our LLM output, and we see the citations here. And then on the right, I just pulled a screenshot of the report itself and realized that a lot of this was just pulling straight from this report that had been written in 2018 for the ARC. So there are some challenges and some spaces where it's very important to think critically about where this data is coming from, about what's being cited, and also about what time periods it's referencing. I know that in one of our sessions a couple of months ago, a group had done an OpenAI search about find us all of the top employers in this industry in our state. And looking at that list of employers, the list had companies that had gone out of business or that had been acquired or had gone through major layoffs. And so having that on the ground and local understanding of what's happened more recently is extremely helpful to be able to overcome some of those challenges of looking at data that comes from some older reports that are that things have perhaps changed since then. So at this point in our webinar, our goal is for this to be a workshop, and we want to get a lot of folks input and active and engaged on here. So if you are, again, you haven't opened up your preferred kind of tool for searching, now is the time. So this is intended to be a participatory session. So come prepared to try out. I will be using ChatGPT free version and doing a little bit simpler prompts than what Jacob was providing before. But if there's one that you want to use, feel free to ask it the same questions, and we would love to get your input on what you're seeing from the outputs. So we'll provide some prompts, but we're then going to hand them off to you to conduct your own queries. So I'm going to run a query and use a prompt that I pulled together and just talk through a little bit of what I am seeing. As I'm doing that, I want you all, as you're representing your regions and coalitions, to try it out for your local area. As Jacob was looking at Central Virginia, I want everybody to take some time to take a look at where they're working and the industries of focus. So what I want to look at is for an audience of blank. We're going to look at a couple of different audiences. Deliver a concise strategic plan, including an executive summary on an operational model to support blank. We'll get into that. Offer 3 potential approaches with their risks and drawbacks, and provide a report style output with texts and tables. So I'm going to copy this over, and I'm actually going to copy this into the chat as well and just show you what I will be searching. And we're going to start with a new chat here. And so the goal is here right now for an audience of private sector investors. Jacob and Marissa, can you see my screen okay? Is it showing the internet browser?
Yes,
Okay, good.
it is.
As long as it's not still showing the PowerPoint.
Correct.
Deliver a concise strategic plan, including an executive summary, on an operational model to support new forestry products processing in Western North Carolina and East Tennessee. Offer 3 potential approaches with their risks and drawbacks, provide an output style report with text and tables, and then show a short ROI. I put an extra letter in there. Short ROI sensitivity scenarios for each of the potential approaches. So we're going to run this. And so as the output comes out pretty quickly, this is our strategic plan around forestry products processing. So Western North Carolina offer unique opportunity. Got our background. We've got 3 operational models: an engineered wood products facility, especially hardwood, and biomass and biochemicals. And I asked this question specifically because I am not an expert on forestry. And if anything, I was hoping to use this as a tool to start to understand a little bit more about forestry and about the context. And so we see some broad, big picture market context, demand, challenges, and then we see the different operational approaches and their estimated capital expenditures and operations from a kind of a large mid-scale facility, a specialty hardwood hub, or a biomass and biochemicals plant with a number of risks and drawbacks and advantages. And again, I asked them to do this for an audience of private sector investors. So it's going to have a number of things in this output that are going to look like the way that a private sector investor thinks. So they're going to think about those base assumptions for discount rates, markets, IRR, that payback period for the different scenarios. And you have that sensitivity analysis, a base case, optimistic, pessimistic assumptions. And then it has some different strategic recommendations. So short term, medium term, and long term. So what I thought was really interesting was I then went through and I wrote the same text in, but I changed this to local elected officials. And so it's the same prompting question, but for a different audience. And went ahead and ran the same thing. And so it's interesting as you read through it because we're going to see the same operational approaches. You're going to see some of the same strengths, opportunities, and challenges. But then some of the way that they calculate impact and calculate ROI is different. So rather than talking about things like IRR and capital expenditures and operational expenditures, it's going to talk about the local benefits. How many jobs are going to be created? So the outputs here now are something that's going to speak to an audience that is an audience of local policymakers, jobs created, local tax revenue, and looking at that again, optimistic, base case, and pessimistic. Again, using somewhat different parameters and different outputs for this audience. So those policy recommendations look a little different, focus on infrastructure and zoning, workforce, incentives, and cluster development. And so for policymakers, the type of output is going to vary. And the way that you prompt and you ask it to do that, and of course I've run out of my free limit. I don't have the paid version like Jacob does. You can start to see the differences between what comes out for an investor or private sector audience versus what comes out for a public policy or policymaker audience. And so that was my prompt to you as well, is to try 2 or 3 different audiences and see how these outputs are different. So I want to pause right now because I hope that as I've been working on this, y'all have been taking a look at some of your questions and your operational models. And I know that you're probably still multitasking, might be looking at 2 different monitors right now. But I want to step back and go to some of our discussion questions and say what worked. As you read your output or you read my output, where are there useful information, pieces of information? How does this compare to strategic plans that you've created and what sources are cited? And then on the flip side, what's missing? Are there important pieces of context that are missing? Is the output accurately representative of your region or whose perspectives are not included? And there may be other things that are missing. So I found that this exercise for me was very helpful as a first look at forestry for the first time, kind of working in this space, understanding what that is. I understand the economic context well. But there are no sources cited. Again, I'm just using the free version here. Some of these, return on investment assumptions, I don't know what went into those calculations, but to start to understand how that language is used, I think is a valuable piece of information. And then understanding and making sure that this accurately represents our region and the place that we're trying to work, and make sure that there are not voices that are being ignored or other parameters or other pieces of context that need to be added to the discussion. So I want to pause here. I am going to go back to the prompt that I had shared before, and I want to open this up for discussion. I want to ask, were you able to do this work? Were you able to kind of successfully provide a few prompting questions around your region? And what were your initial impressions or takeaways?
I can get us started. I did this, and I think this is a really interesting conversation because I don't think to ask it such big big questions usually to write an entire report. And as the type of work that we do, it's kind of interesting to see like what it would pop out for like a question that is like a year of our work sometimes, or a half a year of our work. And so I asked it about North Carolina, where we're at, about delivering a strategic plan about a program we're researching that's working to increase manufacturing and processing of ag products. So I asked it to look at for an audience for the Department of Ag who has this program and they're managing it, but then also to ask from the perspective of the legislature who funds it. And it did provide different answers, different context and different key considerations. So it definitely knew like if you're the legislature and you're interested in funding this project in the future, like what they would consider in terms of like funding limits and whether to be like conservative with how they fund it, or and so yeah, this is just really interesting.
From our attendees, if you were able to run a scenario during the session or had any inputs on the scenario that we ran, I want to get your opinions on what resonated or what concerns you have.
Um, one of the challenges that I noticed kind of off the bat is our coalition really tries to do things from an indigenous lens as opposed to a Western capitalist lens. And so GPT tends to default to the Western capitalist style. And I have to push on it pretty hard and read pretty deeply for that sort of thing, on whatever outputs it gives me. But I I also feel like it pulled a lot from things that, like, so we use a paid version of GPT, and it pulled a lot from things that I've already asked it. Like we've already used it to do some thought lead or some thought partnership on secondary markets. And one of the strategies that it gave us was a regional secondary market consortium, which is interesting that took stuff that I already gave it and was like, well, we should include that in this report. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it gave us a pretty powerful report, and I really like that it was like I can tailor it to the specific audience.
Yeah, but it's interesting as you mentioned that like that cultural context is just, it really emphasizes the challenge of using a tool like this that is not going to necessarily understand that cultural context of an indigenous perspective. So I do like, I love that insight.
Tusi, could I ask you, when you're asking it to take that lens, do you just type out like, could you look at this from an indigenous, non-capitalist lens, or can you like refer to what we, have talked about before? I'm just curious, like how you ask it to think that way.
Yeah, usually I get the initial response, and then we have like specific documents and things that outline like indigenous values and have explanations on, strength-based approaches. And I'll give it those documents and say, now can you rework this based off of these values and tailor it to this perspective.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Mhm.
Good to see you, by the way.
You too. I'm not sure. I haven't tried, but I'm not confident it would give us something valuable if I just said, "Can you do this from an indigenous perspective?"
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think
that's
I
what I
think it
was
would need a lot
wondering.
of context.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you hit on a couple of the big challenges that we highlighted earlier on in the presentation, and you also got into some that are becoming more of an issue now that the models are actually learning from the things that we talk to the models about. So a little bit more of an advanced thing, for paid users of ChatGPT and any of these other platforms out there. It's probably a good idea to start getting a little bit familiar with the settings within the platform. So if you go into the settings of ChatGPT and personalization, for instance, if you wanted it to always respond from a particular perspective, you can actually specify that within the personalization section. And there's a memory section that you can manage. So if you don't want it to reference things that you've had a conversation with it about before, you can actually turn that functionality off. And you can kind of turn it on or off. You can kind of get rid of some of the memory, leave some of the memory there. You can kind of customize all of those things. And I think it's a perfect kind of opportunity to call that out, because it will, if you are brainstorming about something and it comes up with an answer, that could be something that it pulls in from the memory to help with a task that you want to be completely separate, or maybe you do want it to include that. So yeah, these software tools are getting more and more advanced, and they're trying to make them more easily, I don't know, they're trying to make it more personified to interact with you and remember things like you would if you were interacting with a colleague or an associate. So great use case, though. I think that's awesome to hear kind of what you've been doing and what you've been able to get out of it.
Susie, I saw you came off mute for a minute too.
Well, I just had like kind of just a question or a thought. I don't know. For me, like the strategic planning is about sitting in a room and it's messy and you're fighting and you're arguing and people put stuff in there and they take ownership of it and it lives because everybody had their hand in it. Like this just seems to me like it doesn't. I mean, I guess I don't understand how it could provide value other than maybe just, I don't know. It's just confusing to me. I just, for me, you have to, for a plan to live, people have to have ownership of it. They have to have read it. They have to put input into it. They can know what page their comments got included. I don't know. That's the part that's strange to me about this.
And I think that's the conversation that we want to have. I feel like we're not coming into this advocating for the use of an AI tool to generate a strategic plan. And if anything, the point you make is maybe one of the critical drawbacks, or the critical challenges to doing that, and having these opportunities to share, and have, I think, even just awareness. Like if you pull something off the shelf and you're like, this reads a lot like it was written by an AI, there's a chance that it was. So Susie, I think that input and like that real work of community engagement isn't something that is going to be replaced by an AI tool, because again, I come at this being more of a practitioner in the economic development space and less of a AI knowledge, AI expert or thought leader. So when this question arose, I was like, how can we really do this? So I hear you.
If I could add on to that, I was thinking the same thing, Susie, when I first put it in. That's what I was kind of saying. Like, we're asking these questions that it takes us like a year to reach out to people and get the information, and it spits something out so quickly. And so, yeah, would love to hear examples of how people have used this for strategic plans and if they found it to be a good, not substitute, or like substitute, or what part is it a good substitute for? That's kind of my question. So thanks, Susie.
From any of those who did incorporate AI tools, I know from our poll at the beginning, there were a handful of folks who said they had incorporated AI tools into their strategic planning process. And would you care to share if there were any things that worked or any things that didn't? I know, again, there are challenges with that. The importance of getting that community buy-in and input is not something an AI tool is going to do. Well, great. And Marissa and Jacob, if there's anything else we want to add before we close out today.
Great, nothing from my side. Just I'll give Jacob a second to say any final words.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else from me either. If you do have any specific questions, always feel free to reach out. I'm more than happy to brainstorm as a real human partner as opposed to AI about anything that's related to this topic.
Jacob, I do have a question, and I know we're kind of getting towards the end, but maybe it'd be helpful for other people to hear. Just because I think you've used it more than a lot of us, and how you have used, if you have some examples, like AI in writing, like the type of work that we do, or strategic reports, like your process personally, just as someone who's gotten quite a bit of exposure to this.
Yeah, and similar to Mike's use case, I would say at a high level, it's really good for getting you familiar with a topic that you're unfamiliar with. I still, even though I use it often and I've seen the advancements that these new models have made and the fact that they're now citing sources and things, still, I don't trust it 100%. I always go back and verify, and I do my best to provide these tools with as much appropriate context as possible. So things like data analysis, things like that, it's actually the more advanced models are getting really good at that, and it is building more trust for me. I think these are large language models, so drafting text, they're great at that. And if you have a good outline or a good idea for a section or a report that you want to just, the hardest part for me with writing is getting started. So using AI to help get started, and then I can come in and refine it myself to make sure that it meets the finished, quality of product that I need, cite the appropriate sources that I know should be cited within that particular section. Brainstorming, it is, our environment, I work virtually often. So I don't necessarily have the luxury of always being in the room with a group of people. So if I have some ideas that I kind of want to pitch back and forth, I can do that. And Mike's great prompt example, give the benefits and the drawbacks associated with each of those ideas. Not necessarily because it's going to be 100% accurate, but it gives me some form of foundation to build from as I continue to move forward with the task. I would say, it's very helpful at the beginning of things. And then as you get towards that 90% piece, the human in the loop is the one who's going to carry that and really make the product ultimately what it would be. Cool. I mean, the image generation models are also getting really good. It's kind of fun to mess around with those for folks who haven't done that yet. And I will say, moving forward, for those of you who keep up with OpenAI, they just announced Agent Kit as a new functionality within the ChatGPT platform. It is more of an API-based pricing. It's not kind of a set, you pay $20 per month and get it. You pay for however much memory of the model you're using at any given time. And it gives normal folks the capability to create automated workflows that, previously you would have had to have a kind of workplace automation expert to craft it out in something like, the Microsoft suite or N8N or whatever automation platform you're using. So I'm not a coder, but these platforms are extremely good at writing software. So if you weren't a software developer before, I'll go out on a limb here and say everyone here can now develop software. So if you're doing data analysis with tools like Python and things like that, it's even better at code than it is at human natural language. So don't be afraid to experiment, because when you're chatting with these things and doing data analysis, the way it's doing it is it's actually taking your prompt. It's going to go write the code to do the analysis, and then it's going to spit you back out the answer. And you can kind of see how it does that all along the way. So definitely think it's really broken down the barrier between human language and computer language for us.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I want to thank everybody again for their time and for their input, and really, recognizing that the real world of strategic planning is messy. It requires a lot of, real hard participatory process and human input and buy-in, which is something that, for now, Gen AI tools are not replacing. But it's been good to share and learn from everybody today. And thank you all for your time and participation at today's webinar.
Thanks, everyone. And just a reminder, you can find this recording after the fact. I'll send it out to you all. So if you want to revisit anything we went over today, you can surely do that. Have a great rest of your day.